Okay, hi, my name is Jamie Wise. I'm the Managing Director of Frank, and welcome to our fourth edition of Frank Talk, which is our quarterly digital newsletter, which features videos, blogs, case studies, and lots of our digital work and innovation with the NHS. It's been nearly 12 months since our last edition. As you can imagine, we focused on looking after the NHS, our client base, and our staff through the pandemic. But it's good that we're launching again this summer, and hopefully brighter days ahead with Boris's news on the restrictions last night. I'm delighted that Dr. Helen Winter joins me today. She's the consultant clinical psychologist at South London and Maudsley NHS Trust. And she's here today to talk about her experience of leading the Keeping Well initiative in the South East London integrated care system. So good morning, Helen, and thank you for your time. So could you just give us a little bit of background to the Keeping Well initiative?
Yeah, sure. So I think, most people are probably familiar now with the fact that health and social care staff have been quite significantly impacted by the pandemic. As we all have to certain degrees, but the working contexts have just kind of really exacerbated this for a number of different members of staff. And we know that the recent studies are already, really showing this in the numbers. So if you look at rates of post-traumatic stress disorder, anxiety, depression, it's much higher amongst our health and care colleagues. I think the rates of post-traumatic stress disorder, for example, is something like 4.4% in the general population and about 24% for health and care staff. So this was quite quickly recognised, and NHS England made the decision to support a number of staff support initiatives across the UK and provided some funding to do that. So then there was a kind of a quick turnaround to decide how that money might be spent. So our work in South East London is led by the integrated care system, which covers Bexley, Bromley, Greenwich, Southwark, Lambeth and Lewisham. And they commissioned the piece of work with South London and Maudsley, which we're leading on now, to develop the staff support offer. So I think the idea is essentially that we want to improve access to staff support, and that's done in various ways across the country. But I think one common denominator perhaps is that there's a focus on developing a digital portal, an online space for staff.
And sort of the key objectives to that phase one, what was was that worked with the integrated care system to sort of put together that?
Yeah, so I think the key objectives across the UK was around improving access to staff support across health and care. And that's really key because we know that actually, on the whole, social care perhaps didn't have quite the same level of access to support that our colleagues within health might have. And that's, on the most part, it's because we've got really large healthcare providers, large hospitals and so on. But perhaps, many more smaller sort of providers within social care. So our objectives for the first phase, there was a big focus on building the portal, and we worked with Frank to do that, and staff groups across the patch to get an initial first iteration of the website up, which would act as a single point of access for staff support for staff across South East London. We also had a bit of a levelling up process, so we used some of their budget to really lean into the areas that we knew didn't get very much support within the first wave. So social care, our clinical commissioning groups, primary care as well, so GPs, surgeries and so on. And we did a number of listening events and created a number of supportive reflective spaces where staff were able to receive support, but also share their experiences of staff support, what their hopes might be, what the barriers might be. And it was really helpful because we were then able to use a lot of that information going into phase two, into really kind of developing the offer and making it bespoke for what our staff needs are.
Right, okay. And how have you found because obviously you work for the Mental Health Trust, and obviously you've had to take a much sort of broader view of this with working with, across social care, the CCG, and so on. How have you and obviously acute services, how have you gone about managing that and approaching that?
Yeah, so I think it's It's helpful to collaborate, you know, as early on as possible, rather than kind of just creating spaces where people can come and share their thoughts. Because I think even at the point of design and understanding how best to collaborate and listen to our colleagues, it's helpful to get that input. So we have various committees that we're involved with linked to the ICS, but obviously you typically have much more kind of senior people within those spaces. So I think what's been important is for us to develop and set up user groups from really early on, have a smaller group of people with representatives from across the patch who you can collaborate with to create some of these spaces, and also get into as many existing spaces as possible. So actually there's some really helpful like provider forums within social care where you get all the social care managers together, various training spaces, so just kind of quickly mapping and understanding where all those spaces are, and then kind of piggybacking on those, I suppose, has been really good.
Really?
And I think also there's something around, because we're obviously coming from a particular space within mental health, just being really clear that we're not assuming what might be stressful for other staff groups. We're kind of really coming with an open mind and wanting to learn and wanting to listen, as opposed to coming in with, you know, our big mental health shoes on and thinking that we know exactly what everybody needs. I think, you know, genuine curiosity has been really important.
Yeah, I can imagine. And I suppose digital brings different advantages and challenges in, you know, with the portal. Can you talk about a little bit how, you know, your experience of that, of using digital channels?
Yeah, so I guess the NHS are probably typically known as being a little bit more behind, perhaps, when you kind of look at other industries in terms of jumping onto like using digital channels. I think we're getting there, but perhaps we had to get up to speed a bit quicker than other industries. So, you know, it's very quite obvious quite quickly that, you know, digital channels could help us reach a larger number of people quite quickly. And, you know, it's easy for us to kind of, and we've learned this, I guess, to start to figure out how to target particular groups, specific groups of people. Also quickly getting used to the use of analytics and being able to see how the site's being used and what areas, you know, are particular favourites at that time and what that might say, and being able to take that back to various discussion groups has been really helpful. Also, with the site, you know, you have the ability to be anonymous, and I think that's very unique to a digital channel, and that you can, you know, you can log on, you can get self-help resources, you can use the online chat function, and you actually don't have to share anything about yourself to be able to do that. So that's been great. And just having, yeah, I guess that's sort of single point of access where we're kind of able to organise all the information, because I think people were feeling really, especially from certain sectors, feeling really overloaded by the amount of information that's out there. So you can get things nicely organised quite quickly. I think in terms of the challenges, so I mean, something as simple as the availability of IT resources. So we might have, you know, within some of the larger hospitals, an intranet system, computers for people to use and so on. But in smaller providers, that's not necessarily the case. People's IT literacy really varies. Some people have really struggled kind of going online, especially if the majority of their job is very much face-to-face. So it's a real shift actually in terms of culture and ways of working that people have experienced. But again, I guess we're trying to think outside the box. So we know, for example, where there are, you know, within social care, perhaps in certain areas where people are less likely to have an internet page or work emails, they will be using social media. So being able to kind of really understand how we can tap into use of social media and promoting the website in those ways. But yeah, lots of new territory for us to cover.
Yeah, I can imagine. And it sounds like with this sort of phase 2 engagement with stakeholder groups, you know, is going to be hugely important. And you know, I know that you're targeting Black, Asian and minority ethnic communities with these discovery sessions. How has this process sort of challenged your sort of initial thoughts on the project? Obviously that those sessions are to happen, but how have they challenged your thoughts really?
Yeah, so I mean, this is definitely an area we've been already thinking a lot about within my own organisation at Southampton Maudsley, you know, how we can ensure that support is provided in a way that's accessible, that feels safe, that avoids tokenism, in ways that we can genuinely engage communities. So it's been helpful to take some of that thinking into these spaces, but again, in a way that we're kind of not assuming that's the same for everybody. So creating lots of listening spaces has been really key. And some of the stuff that's been coming back from those is, colleagues from Black, Asian, minority ethnic backgrounds saying that they feel, and actually quite similar to what we might hear with our client groups, but they feel that support services don't necessarily reflect cultural sensitivities, and that actually creates a barrier to access. So needing support to be offered in more languages. So thinking, for example, on the site around what translation options might be available, what other ways we can kind of share information other than just kind of written word, the use of video testimonials, which also helps because I think there's lots of stigma within certain communities still around kind of accessing support. So yeah, the use of testimonial videos, thinking about how we can also tap into the communities that people are part of. So as well as this being, focused on staff, if we think there are, 100,000 health and social care staff in South East London, this is also a population health piece. So what other communities might these people be part of? Thinking around particular faith groups and how we can work with faith groups to help people be able to access support. And I think another important point that came up, which we're kind of really wanting to work on more in this phase, is around, so I mentioned languages, but also there's something around terminology, and some of the concepts around mental health not being found in people's native languages. So how else can we kind of support an understanding around mental health using some of the resources that are available? So we've got lots of things on the site at the moment around specific counselling wellbeing services targeted to specific people within different Black, Asian, minority ethnic communities. Lots of information around self-help resources to the same vein. And then also in phase 2, we've had some more money from NHS England, which we'll be able to use to focus specifically on improving access and engagement for our Black, Asian, minority ethnic colleagues. So that'll be through, again, more scoping sessions, listening more to what people want, what their thoughts are on the site at the moment, making improvements on that basis, but also really thinking about how we can target our marketing campaigns and comms campaigns. And quite exciting and unique to the Keeping Well in South East London offer is this idea around developing an online community forum space. So how we might support peer support as well, which is something that was really talked a lot about within our focus groups for Black, Asian, minority ethnic colleagues. So an online community space, which is kind of to the vein of what's used on Money Saving Expert, and using the knowledge and skills of people who have that expertise to help us to create those spaces on the site as well.
And you just mentioned 100,000 people in the sort of the immediate care and health community. That's quite significant. What sort of successful tactics have you had in engaging with that sort of number of colleagues? I know you've sort of touched on sort of areas that you've focused on, and you mentioned the faith areas and so on, but that's quite a broad. It's obviously quite a broad amount of people.
Yeah, so it's definitely a large number of people, and as diverse a group that is in terms of professional background and staff groups, we're working in South East London as well. We have an amazingly diverse community, so I think it's kind of really understanding what the existing networks are and relationships are, both inside and outside of work, and then thinking how we can best work with those. So I think from what I mentioned earlier on at the beginning, it's where it's important to work with the group of people you want to be working with, from key representatives of or stakeholders in from early on. So thinking about tapping into existing networks, but also how we can start creating spaces, getting people to design those spaces with us from the beginning. And then thinking about, where there are comms teams available, how we can work with those comms teams. They've been incredibly helpful already with the larger providers. Again, larger providers often have various networks, so how can we work with those networks and those network leads? what events again are already existing that we can go and promote this space at, or these spaces at. And also, as I mentioned, so the kind of outsider work networks, thinking about, you know, various community leaders, faith leaders, and so on. So we know, for example, there's one particular church, it's a really large church in South East London, and we're talking with their faith leader to think about how we can start promoting this site and the work that we're doing within their church, because he knows that there's a number of people who work in the various health and care providers in South East London who might benefit from it. So I think it's thinking outside the box compared to what we might do, you know, typically when we're working within one organisation.
It's really interesting because, you know, we've at Frank, we've over the last sort of, you know, 6 to 9 months seen a number of these sort of Keeping Well initiatives across the country. And I suppose what's quite interesting with yours is, you know, you're talking about that open-minded approach, you know, improving that access engagement and, you know, essentially building an online community forum and some of the things that I wrote down there. And, you know, we certainly see the most successful digital projects is building the website is, you know, is the initial part. Then there's so much more goes into it in engagement and content building and an approach that you put in, which I think for a lot of our listeners who started on this journey, have you got any advice, you know, obviously being the lead of this, for other people who could be at different stages thinking about a Keeping Well site, or, you know, in the early stages of it, or, you know, just approaching that phase 2?
Yeah, so I think, you know, it's important to kind of take your, whatever your 9 to 5 hat might be off, because often people will be, you know, seconded into this work and doing this work alongside your substantial post. So it's really clear to kind of think about that, because I think that really then helps you become conscious of any assumptions. I know I keep talking about this, but I think it's been really important. We're really conscious of any assumptions you might be making from working within your home setting. You know, actually working in mental health is quite different, for example, to working in primary care. The things that we find, or our frontline staff might find particularly stressful within mental health, might not be the same as if you go into acute services. So kind of really taking a step back and just being conscious of any assumptions that you might be making. I think another really key thing is that I think a lot of us, and I say us in terms of the other leads as well, went into this initially thinking, actually, this is about kind of becoming a front door, the portal becoming a front door to accessing our IAP services, or our psychological therapy services, or getting people into therapy quickly. And actually, what's been really interesting from the listening events, looking at the analytics, having these conversations, is that that's absolutely an important part. Like, you know, from where I started in this conversation, you know, there has been an increase in mental health problems, and we do need to get people the help they need quickly. But actually, it's been so much more than that. People have been really interested in understanding resources for their teams, what support leaders can get, and access to financial advice, looking at how they can kind of stay healthy, get their diet and exercise routine back on track. You know, some anxieties around lockdown easing, people return to the workplace, how they could juggle their home life and work life priorities, and so on. So I think understanding this as like a population health piece has been really helpful. Thinking about particular groups who are not properly engaging yet, and actually how can those improvements be made, and then also thinking holistically about what support people might want to receive, and generating a sense of community whilst doing that. I think they're the sort of the key ingredients that we've been focusing on.
Well, I think it's excellent feedback, and it's been a fascinating interview. I think, you know, thank you so much, Helen, for spending your time, you know, and sharing this. And the aim behind this newsletter is to share information among, you know, our clients, you know, NHS staff. So I'm sure people will, you know, take a real interest in this, and for being the first one we've done virtually as well, which we never thought would quite happen. We'll be putting this video on Frank Talk shortly, and if you are, as I said, if you're thinking about a Keeping Well project, or, you know, you're in the early stages of this, or late stages, and you want to connect with Helen, we'd be delighted to do that. Or if you want to leave a message on Frank Talk, that we can do that. But you know, just a final thank you to you, Helen, for giving up your precious time. Really appreciate it. Thank you very much.